My name is Julian Reyes, and I was 31 years old when my mother canceled my birthday 3 days before it happened. Not because someone was sick, not because of any real emergency, but because my younger sister had manufactured another crisis at the exact moment the attention was finally supposed to land on me. "We're canceling your dinner," my mother said the second I picked up. "Your sister needs us." Behind me, a case of wine sat unopened on the counter. 40 place cards waited in their envelopes. I'd already paid the restaurant deposit, hired a photographer, and arranged cars for relatives who'd sworn they'd finally show up for me. "What happened this time?" I asked. "She had a fight with her fiancé. She's a wreck." My father texted before I could even respond. "You're the steady one. You'll understand." That sentence had erased graduations, a promotion, 2 holidays, and every milestone I'd ever earned. But this time I'd already seen the sabotage coming. Days earlier, my sister had complained that my dinner was too much. Then suddenly, she announced she was falling apart and needed the whole family around her. I didn't cancel the restaurant. I signed the reservation over to a shelter downtown, packed one bag, closed the account my parents still had access to, and drove north toward the lake house my grandfather had left behind. My family assumed I'd cool off and come back. They had no idea what I was about to find in his papers. They had no idea why my mother had spent 20 years training me to accept second place. And when they chose my sister again, they never got back the life they built on top of me. 10 years later, one final recording forced all 3 of them to look at exactly what that choice had cost. Before I tell you what was waiting in that lake house and what happened after I disappeared, tell me where you're watching this from tonight and what time it is where you are. I want to know how far this one travels. The lake house sat 4 hours north of Burlington, at the end of a gravel road my mother always called unsafe and pointless. Growing up, she discouraged me from going there unless the whole family came along. She said my grandfather, Desmond Hale, was stubborn, secretive, and stuck in old feuds. But he was the only person who never once called me steady when what he really meant was convenient. Desmond died 8 months before my canceled birthday. According to my mother, he left behind a sagging cabin, a stretch of overgrown shoreline, and years of unpaid property taxes. She kept suggesting we sell the land to a developer and split whatever was left between her, my father, and my sister, Camille. Whenever I asked to see the estate paperwork, she said the lawyer was still untangling complications. I believed her, because believing her was easier than admitting my own mother might be hiding something from me on purpose. When I pulled up to the lake house that night, the porch light was already on. A man in a dark coat stepped out as I parked, and for one ridiculous second I thought it was my grandfather waiting for me. Instead, he introduced himself as Marcus Delaney, Desmond's estate attorney. "Your grandfather said you might show up right after your 31st birthday," he told me. I almost laughed. He predicted the dinner would get canceled. He predicted your mother would find a reason you couldn't celebrate it. Marcus led us into the house and led me to Desmond's study. His reading glasses still sat beside an unfinished crossword. A photograph of me at 19, standing in his workshop holding a half-built canoe, sat framed on the desk. The polished family portrait my mother displayed on every wall of her own house was nowhere in sight. Marcus set a folder in front of me. Inside was Desmond's will, signed 2 years earlier. He'd left the lake property, 40 acres of shoreline, and a controlling stake in Hale timber and land to me. Not my mother. Not my sister. Me. The assets were worth millions. A resort group had already tried to buy part of the shoreline, but Desmond had turned them down flat because it would have ruined the water. Instead, he wanted the land turned into a boat building and craft school. The kind of place I used to dream about during the summers the first spent in his workshop, hands full of sawdust. "There's one more condition," Marcus said. "You take full control on your 31st birthday. Until then, your mother held temporary administrative authority." My stomach dropped. What did she do with it? He opened a second folder. For nearly 2 years, my mother had been pulling money out of the estate's operating account, labeling the withdrawals as maintenance, legal fees, emergency repairs. Most of it had actually gone to Camille's rent, her debts, her retreats, a failed skincare line, and a deposit on a wedding venue she'd booked despite not technically being engaged yet. More than $380,000 gone. Marcus had found the pattern months earlier and warned Desmond. Before he died, Desmond amended the trust so control would pass straight to me at 31, because he suspected that if my mother knew what I actually owned, she'd find a way to talk me out of it. Underneath the ledgers was a handwritten note in his blocky print. Julian, they taught you that being steady means giving up what's yours. Doesn't. Steady means protecting what matters, even from people who share your blood. Suddenly the canceled dinner wasn't just one more cruelty. My mother had needed me distracted that exact week, because she knew the trust was transferring. Camille's meltdown gave the family a reason to keep me away from the lake, while my mother finished paperwork reclassifying the withdrawals as authorized family distributions. Was Camille in on it? I asked. Marcus hesitated. She took the money. Whether she understood where it came from is something we still need to establish. My phone buzzed on the desk. My mother twice. My father once. Camille sent 6 texts, starting with "I'm sorry you're upset," and ending with "don't punish everyone because you're jealous." I turned the phone face down. What happens now? I asked. Marcus looked toward the dark window. You decide whether this stays a family argument or becomes a fraud case. All my life, my mother had solved Camille's disasters by handing me the bill. She'd used my college fund to quietly settle something Camille did in high school. She'd pressured me to co-sign a lease Camille later walked away from. She'd used my own professional contacts to smooth over a mess Camille made at a job. Every time I pushed back, my mother asked why I wanted my sister to suffer. Sitting in that study, I finally landed on the better question. Why had everyone assumed it should be me instead? I told Marcus to freeze every trust account, notify the bank that my mother's authority had ended, and save every message coming in from my family. I wasn't ready to call the police, but I was done protecting people who'd never once protected me. The next morning I walked through the house with a notebook instead of nostalgia. I logged broken windows, unpaid invoices, furniture my mother had claimed was sold, and boxes my grandfather had organized by year. This wasn't a peaceful retreat anymore. It was a crime scene wearing an inheritance as a disguise. One box held my old sketchbooks and half-built model boats. Desmond had kept every single one. Underneath them was an envelope marked for Julian. Once he knows everything. Inside, he described something I barely remembered. When I was 13, he'd set up education accounts for Camille and me. Mine was larger, because I'd qualified for an advanced boat-building apprenticeship 2 states away. 2 years later, Camille got caught cheating on an exam at her private school, and threatened to withdraw entirely if it wasn't handled quietly. My mother paid the school off using money pulled from my account. I'd been told the apprenticeship program lost my paperwork. At 17, Desmond had helped me set up a small workshop selling custom furniture online. My mother shut it down after Camille said watching my success made her feel like a failure. I was told it violated some zoning rule. At 23, a regional design fair invited me to show a set of restored canoes. Camille had just ended an engagement and threatened to hurt herself if the family came to my exhibit instead of staying home with her. My mother pressured me into pulling out, promising another chance would come. Never did. Desmond's letter had dates, bank records, messages he'd saved from my mother. In one she'd written, "Julian can bounce back from disappointment. Camille can't. We have to put our resources where they're actually needed." Resources. Not love. Not time. Resources. My mother had turned favoritism into a spreadsheet. Because I didn't fall apart, she read my stability as permission to keep taking. Camille learned the opposite lesson. Every breakdown bought attention, money, protection. Marcus brought in Renee Okafor, an accountant who'd worked with Desmond's company for years. Together we traced every withdrawal. Camille's emergencies followed one pattern without fail. Whenever a document needed my signature or an investment matured, or Desmond had scheduled an estate meeting, Camille suddenly had a crisis. A car accident with no police report, a medical bill with no invoice, an eviction notice from a property my parents secretly owned. One recovered email told the whole story. 3 days before my birthday, Camille had written to our mother, "Are you sure this will actually work? She already paid for everything." My mother answered, "She'll be upset, but she always comes back. Once she signs the new authorization, we can pay the account back later." Camille wrote, "And if she asks about Grandpa's company?" My mother replied, "She doesn't know she owns it." I stared at that line until the words blurred together. Camille had known. This wasn't just another cry for attention. It was a planned distraction, time to pressure me into signing away voting control of my grandfather's company, while I was too exhausted from grief and guilt to read the fine print. If it had worked, a development group's new offer for the shoreline would have gone through. My mother could have sold the land, quietly replaced what she'd stolen, handed Camille a windfall, and still looked like the responsible one. Desmond's protected shoreline would have become vacation condos, and the workshop I used to dream about would have vanished with it. My first instinct was to expose everything immediately, but revenge delivered too soon is just a warning shot. I wanted them to keep acting exactly the way they always had, certain I'd come back, apologize, and sign whatever they put in front of me. So I answered my mother's next call. "Julian, thank God. We've been out of our minds." "I needed some time," I said, making myself sound tired instead of furious. "You scared your sister half to death. She thinks you hate her." "I don't hate her." My mother exhaled. "Come home this weekend. We'll do dinner. Your father wants to talk through some paperwork on Grandpa's property, but it's nothing complicated." There it was. Not one word of apology. Not one question about where I actually was. Just the paperwork. "I'll think about it," I said. "Julian, we're your family." For 31 years those 4 words had locked me in place every single time. That night, they sounded like a confession instead. Marcus advised me not to confront anyone until the accounts were fully secured. Renee spent 2 weeks reconstructing every transfer. I stayed at the lake, but I didn't spend my days watching sunsets. I met with contractors, reviewed the company's books, called Desmond's old business partners, and learned exactly how to use the authority my family had tried to quietly steal. Within 2 weeks I'd replaced the compromised financial manager. Within 3, I'd killed the condo proposal and opened talks with a regional land trust instead. I also reached out to a craft school director who'd known my grandfather for years, and together we sketched out seasonal apprenticeships, paid residencies, and a public gallery for the finished work. For the first time, building things with my hands wasn't a hobby I had to defend to anyone. Camille called constantly, apologetic at first, then impatient, then furious. "You're punishing Mom over a dinner party." "This was never about the dinner," I said. "Then what is it about?" She was fishing, trying to find out how much I actually knew. "You tell me," I said. The silence ran 4 seconds too long before she started crying. That sound used to flip a switch in me automatically. This time I just remembered her email. She already paid for everything. "You don't care what happens to me," she whispered. "No," I said. "I've just stopped believing something has to happen to me instead." I hung up and blocked the number. The next chapter of my life didn't start the night I drove to the lake. It started the moment her tears stopped running my life for me. 6 weeks after my canceled birthday, I drove back to my parents' house in a plain gray suit, carrying a leather folder. Marcus waited in a car down the block. Renee had already sent copies of the financial evidence to an investigator, though nothing formal had been filed yet. I wanted one last answer before deciding how far this had to go. My father opened the door and pulled me into a hug. "There's my steady boy." The phrase almost made me turn around and leave. Inside, my mother had staged a birthday redo, a grocery store cake under 32 candles, because she explained, "We can just celebrate a little late this year." Camille sat at the table without makeup, in an oversized sweater clearly chosen to make her look fragile. For a moment it almost worked. My mother squeezed my shoulder. My father poured wine. Camille apologized for needing support at the wrong time. Then my mother slid a document beside my plate. Let's just handle this before dessert. It just lets me keep managing Grandpa's property until the estate's finalized. I opened it like I'd never seen a word of it before. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. Did you read this? I asked him. Your mother understands the finances better than I do. That wasn't my question. Camille shifted in her seat. Why are you making this so hostile? I looked at her. When did you find out Grandpa left the company to me? Her face changed instantly. My mother answered for her. Nobody knows exactly what your grandfather intended near the end. He wasn't himself. He passed 3 separate evaluations the year he amended that trust, I said. The room went quiet. I laid the will, the trust amendment, and the withdrawal records out across the table, 1 page at a time. My mother's face went white. By the 3rd page, my father's hands were shaking. $381,000, I said. That's what moved from the estate into accounts tied to Camille. Some of it passed through your joint account, Dad. He looked at my mother. Renata. Her shock curdled into anger fast. That money belongs to this family. Your grandfather built unnecessary walls between us. I was protecting everyone. You were setting up to sell protected land to fund our future. Whose future? Camille slammed her palm on the table. Stop acting like you earned any of this. Grandpa gave you everything because you played the good grandson, visiting him, making him feel guilty about me. I was the only one who called when he got sick, because you always needed to look perfect. There it was, the resentment underneath every single emergency. Camille didn't just want support. She wanted proof that anything I built could be taken from me too. My mother stepped between us. Julian, your sister has struggled in ways you can't understand. I understand more than you think, I said, and set copies of the emails on the table. Camille read the first line and went silent. My father read our mother's reply out loud. She doesn't know she owns it. He set the page down. You planned the phone call. My mother stared at him like the question itself was the betrayal. I was stopping Julian from making an impulsive decision. You canceled his birthday to get his signature. He would have signed eventually. My father turned to look at me, maybe for the first time in years. I didn't know about the trust. But you knew she used my college money. You knew she pressured me into that lease. You knew every milestone of mine disappeared the second Camille objected to it. I thought your mother would pay it back eventually. Did you ever check? He had no answer. My mother started gathering the papers. This has gone far enough. You're emotional, Julian. We'll talk once you've calmed down. I put my hand flat on the documents. No. Tonight you listen. I told them the accounts were frozen. My mother's authority was over. The land sale was dead, and every piece of evidence had already been preserved somewhere else. Then I gave them 2 options. Return every dollar that could be recovered, drop every claim against the estate, hand over complete financial records, and sign a written admission, or I'd authorize a formal fraud complaint. My mother laughed. You'd send your own mother to prison? No, I said. Your choices might. Camille shot up so fast her chair tipped backward. You're destroying us over money you don't even need. That sentence finished off whatever doubt I had left. She wasn't sorry. She was scared, because the money had stopped. What did you spend it on? My father asked her quietly. The truth came out in pieces. A luxury apartment, a leased car, debts, a fake skincare startup, a wedding venue deposit for an engagement that had already fallen apart, because her fiancé had walked away days before my birthday after finding out she'd lied to him about owning Desmond's company. Her crisis was only real because the future she'd stolen was collapsing underneath her. My father walked out without a word. My mother followed him. Camille stood alone next to the overturned chair. You always win, she whispered. I looked at the store-bought cake, meant to prove that harm could be patched up with frosting. No, I said. You were just protected from ever losing. I left the unsigned authorization sitting on the table beside her plate. That night my father called Marcus and agreed to hand over access to every joint account. My mother refused. 3 days later, she tried to move the family house into Camille's name. That single move turned a private betrayal into a legal war. The attempted transfer set off alarms at the bank immediately, since the house had been used as collateral for loans tied to Camille's phantom company. Moving ownership mid-investigation raised fraud flags on its own. The bank froze more accounts. Creditors started asking questions my mother could no longer smooth over. Within a month, the image she'd spent 2 decades polishing began to crack. She wasn't famous, but reputation ran her whole world. Charity boards, fundraising committees, the friend everyone came to for financial advice. It turned out a lot of that generosity had been financed with money that was never hers. Marcus found estate payments routed through 3 charities where she'd taken public credit as the donor. He found transfers that covered fundraisers she personally hosted. When the first charity called her, she blamed an accounting error. When the second asked her to step down, she accused me of running a smear campaign. I hadn't contacted either one. The paper trail did the talking on its own. My father moved into a rented apartment and handed investigators his passwords, tax filings, old messages. Cooperating didn't erase how passive he'd been. But it revealed my mother had kept more from him than even I realized. For years he'd handed her total financial control, because confrontation made him uncomfortable. He called it trust. I called it convenient blindness. One evening he came out to the lake alone. I should have stopped it, he said. Yes. I kept telling myself Camille just needed more support. You knew supporting her always meant taking from me. He looked down. You never fell apart. That doesn't mean I wasn't hurt by it. I understand that now. No, I said. You understand the consequences now. He flinched, but I didn't soften it. Regret after you've been caught isn't the same thing as conscience before it. He handed me an old phone he'd found locked in a drawer. It held years of messages between my mother and Camille. The birthday scheme was only one piece of a bigger plan. They'd also discussed convincing me to move back home by claiming my father was sick, so my mother could install herself as my financial representative. Camille had floated introducing me to one of her ex-fiancé's business contacts, hoping a relationship might talk me into funding one of their projects. In one message my mother described me flatly. He'll resist, then feel guilty. Just give it time. I read every line without crying. My anger had gone cold, less like fire and more like a blueprint. It showed me exactly where the walls needed to go. The next day I had Marcus file a civil suit seeking restitution, my mother's removal from every role tied to the estate, and damages from the attempted house transfer. I also authorized the evidence to be handed to investigators. I never posted anything online, never called relatives to spread the story. Paperwork travels quieter than a public accusation, but it goes further. My mother was served at a charity luncheon. Camille got her papers at the office she'd rented for her skincare brand. By the end of that same week, her landlord ended the lease over unpaid rent. Her car got repossessed, and the wedding venue kept most of her deposit once they found out the reservation had been made using falsified financial statements. She called me from a number I didn't recognize. I have nowhere to go. You can stay with Mom. She might lose the house. She tried to give it to me. Because she loves me. Because she needed to hide it, I said. You're enjoying this. I actually thought about that accusation for a second. Part of me did feel something like satisfaction, but not because she was scared. I felt it because her choices finally belonged to her, and only her. I'm not rescuing you, I said. I'm your brother. You knew Mom was taking money from the estate. I didn't know it was stealing. She said it would be mine eventually anyway. And you believed you'd earned it? Grandpa barely knew me. You barely knew him, I said. She started crying. What am I supposed to do now? It was the one question she'd spent her whole life dodging. Get a job. Sell what you don't need. Talk to the investigators honestly. Stop turning every consequence into somebody else's emergency. You sound heartless, she said. No, I said. I sound unavailable. I blocked the number. Months went by. The civil case uncovered unauthorized loans and falsified expense reports. My mother eventually agreed to give up the house, liquidate what investments she had left, and return whatever had been bought with estate money. It didn't cover everything, but it kept the lake safe from creditors. The criminal inquiry moved forward on its own separate track. My father filed for divorce. Camille rented a room and took an administrative job. She told relatives I'd torn the family apart because Grandpa loved me more. Some of them believed her. Others quietly apologized for looking away from the favoritism they'd watched happen for years. I stopped campaigning for anyone's approval. What mattered was that the pattern had finally stopped. At the lake, construction started on the workshop Desmond had wanted. We restored the main house, turned the old boat shed into shared studios, and set up a scholarship for adults who'd walked away from building things with their hands because their families called it impractical. I named the first residency program the Steady One, not because being steady means endless sacrifice, but because real steadiness sometimes starts with refusing the role everyone else assigned you. 10 years after my canceled birthday, that lake property didn't look anything like the neglected land my mother had wanted to sell off. The original house still stood at the center, surrounded now by 6 cabins, 2 open studios, a shared kitchen, and a small gallery looking out over the protected shoreline. Craftspeople came from all over. Local students took free workshops. A land trust used part of the acreage for water research. Desmond's company turned a profit without ever touching the lake. I ran the place, but I also went back to building, restoring old canoes, mostly the same thing I'd been doing at 19 in that photo on his desk. My first real show was called The Steady One Was Never Invisible. On opening night, the gallery filled with people. My family had once emptied a room of 40 guests because Camille's fiancé walked out on her. 10 years later, strangers drove across 3 states to see work I'd nearly given up on entirely, because my own family had spent a lifetime teaching me that her pain outweighed my purpose. My mother didn't come. After the legal proceedings, she avoided prison through a plea deal, restitution, probation, financial monitoring, community service. She lost the house, her charity seats, most of her social circle, and moved into a small apartment, working part-time at an insurance office. For years she wrote letters blaming Desmond, my father, and me, insisting I'd blown up ordinary family sacrifices into legal charges, that a good son would have handled it all quietly. I never answered any of them. My father came out to the lake twice a year. Polite, distant, limited. He apologized, went to counseling, accepted that forgiveness didn't automatically restore access. I stopped hating him, but I stopped trusting an apology to rewrite what had already happened. Camille changed more slowly. Once my mother's support dried up, she drifted through jobs and relationships for a while. For a long time she kept insisting I'd stolen her inheritance, until an investigator finally showed her Desmond's original records, including the education account my mother had quietly drained. She learned she hadn't lost an inheritance. She'd spent mine. That knowledge didn't fix her overnight. She started therapy, left social media behind, paid back a small piece of what she owed, and stopped reaching out from new numbers. 5 years passed before a letter came with no accusations in it at all. I knew what Mom was doing, she wrote. Maybe I didn't understand every legal detail, but I knew she was taking something that belonged to you. I let myself believe you'd be fine without it because that made it easier to keep what I got. I was jealous and I used being fragile like a weapon. I'm sorry. I kept the letter. I never wrote back. An apology can be honest without owing anyone a reunion. On the 10th anniversary of that canceled birthday, Marcus called. He'd retired, but he was still holding one last sealed instruction from Desmond. The release date is today, he said. There's a letter addressed to all 4 of you. He left a video too. He wants everyone at the lake to hear it, though nobody has to come. I almost said no until Marcus mentioned the video. My father showed up first, looking older and smaller than the man who once texted me that I was steady enough to lose another birthday without it mattering. Camille arrived alone, dressed plainly, guarded. My mother came last, her hair gone silver. Nobody hugged anyone. Marcus set a laptop on Desmond's old desk and pressed play. My grandfather appeared on screen in the same faded flannel shirt he wore every summer at the lake. If you're watching this, he began. Julian's turned 41, and enough time has passed for the truth to actually mean something. He laid it all out. How my mother had funneled resources toward Camille for years. How my father had handed off responsibility just to keep the peace. How Camille had learned to use instability as leverage. And how I'd been rewarded for competence with nothing but distance. Then he got to the part none of us knew was coming. The trust had originally held a second fund, close to $1 million, meant to be split between Camille and my parents, but only if they respected the transfer of the property and let me run the company without interference. If anyone hid the inheritance from me, misused estate money, or pressured me into giving up control, that fund would be pulled entirely and donated straight to the craft school. My mother stared at the screen. She hadn't stolen $400,000 to secure Camille's future. Her choices had cost all three of them nearly $1 million more on top of it. Renata, my grandfather went on, you probably believe you were protecting your younger daughter. You weren't. You taught her that love erases consequences, and then you called Julian cruel for finally refusing to keep paying them. My mother's mouth opened, but nothing came out. To my son-in-law, silence is still a decision. You don't get to hand someone else the authority, and then claim innocence when it's misused. To Camille, pain deserves compassion. Pain isn't ownership. Your brother's success was never proof that you were being neglected. And to Julian, their regret doesn't buy back your time. You owe them honesty, not access. Build what we talked about, and celebrate every birthday they taught you to give up. The screen went dark. My mother finally spoke. He set me up. Camille answered before I could. No. He gave us a choice. My mother turned on her. Everything I did was for you. You did it because you needed me depending on you, Camille said. Coming from her, it landed harder than anything I could have said. After everything I sacrificed, my mother started. You sacrificed Julian, Camille said. That was always the problem. My father walked out without another word. My mother looked at me, waiting for either judgment or comfort. I lost everything, she said. I thought about every opportunity she'd erased, every dollar she'd taken, the birthday she'd wiped off the calendar because she genuinely believed my disappointment cost nothing. No, I said. You lost what you assumed you could take without ever paying for it. She asked whether I'd ever forgive her. I stopped organizing my life around that question a long time ago. I told her, and walked out toward the gallery, where the staff was already setting up for my 41st birthday. Nobody was canceling this one. Nearly 200 people gathered by the water that night. Residents put up unfinished work along the walls. Kids pinned drawings to the fence. A local trio played near the restored garden, and former scholarship students came back to talk about the work they'd once been too afraid to chase. A long table sat in the middle of it all, covered in wildflowers. For most of my life, birthdays had felt like negotiations. Don't ask for too much, don't invite too many people, don't look too happy, because happiness made Camille feel left out, and her discomfort always somehow became my job to manage. At 41, I finally understood that joy doesn't need sign-off from the people who benefit most from your disappointment. My father stayed for the party but kept his distance. Before he left, he handed me a small box holding the actual place card from my canceled 31st birthday. He'd taken it from the restaurant after finding out I'd donated the whole reservation. I kept thinking there'd be some way to fix that night, he said. There wasn't, I told him. He nodded. I know. For once, he didn't ask me to make him feel better about it. Camille stayed near the back until the crowd thinned, then walked over and handed me an envelope with a check inside. Another piece of what she still owed. It isn't much, she said. It's more than last year, I said. I got a promotion. Congratulations, I told her. And the word actually surprised both of us. She looked out at the water. I used to think you had everything because you didn't need anyone. I needed people. I found out they wouldn't show up, I said. I know. We stood there a while in silence. Do you think we'll ever be brother and sister again, she asked. We already are, I said. That doesn't automatically mean we're close. She took the answer without crying, without arguing, without twisting it into proof that I was the cruel one. That was the first real sign she might actually be changing. I never invited her back into my life fully. Reconciliation isn't a prize people collect for finally noticing the damage they caused. Trust comes back slowly through years of consistent choices if it comes back at all. But I stopped hating her. Hating her would have meant she was still the center of my life, and she wasn't anymore. My mother left before the party even started. She sent one last message through Marcus, claiming Desmond had turned the whole family against her. I deleted it without responding. Some people mistake a boundary for punishment because they got comfortable when you didn't have any. Others will tell you exposing betrayal does more damage than the betrayal itself. But silence never protected my mother. It just protected the arrangement. Sacrifice never healed Camille. It just enabled her. My father's passivity bought temporary peace at the cost of permanent harm. The truth only ever destroyed the version of our family that depended on everyone agreeing not to see it. When it was time for the cake, the whole crowd started singing. I looked around at the craftspeople, the students, the neighbors, the friends who'd helped build this place with me. Nobody was waiting for an emergency to interrupt the song. Nobody was watching the door for a sister about to walk in and take the room. Nobody expected me to hand over my own moment just to prove how steady I could be. I closed my eyes and made a wish. Not for revenge, because revenge had already arrived on its own, through consequences nobody had to manufacture. My mother lost the reputation she'd always valued over honesty. Camille lost the safety net that kept her from ever having to grow up. My father lost the fragile peace he'd spent years buying with silence. All three of them lost the future my grandfather had set aside for them, the moment they tried to take mine instead. My wish was simple, that everyone who ever got labeled the steady one in their family would eventually learn what my grandfather taught me. Steadiness was never permission for the people who love you to neglect you. Love was never supposed to mean financing somebody else's irresponsibility, covering up their betrayal, or accepting an empty chair at your own table. Sometimes walking away isn't abandonment. Sometimes it's the first honest answer you've ever given. After everyone left, I walked down to the edge of the water alone. Lights from the retreat stretched out across the lake, all the way to the shoreline my mother had once tried to sell out from under me. 10 years earlier, I'd shown up here with one suitcase, convinced I'd lost my family over a canceled dinner. In reality, that canceled dinner had just exposed a family structure that only worked as long as I stayed obedient. I hadn't lost them that night. I'd finally stopped losing myself. The next morning, I framed my grandfather's last note and hung it in the entrance hall, where every new resident would see it first. Steadiness